Jennifer, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to have a wide-ranging conversation. So, just perhaps to begin with something very simple, where are we?
We are in the Microsoft New England Research and Development Center, which is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We're right next to MIT and down the road from Harvard.
And how did you end up here?
I took a strange
Yeah.
path here.
Jennifer, how did you end up here?
Well, I took a very strange path here. I actually started out as an undergraduate in biology. I wanted to be a doctor. And then I fell in love with physics. I had to take some physics to become a biologist and a doctor to get into medical school. And I fell in love with physics. So then I did a physics major. And then I decided that I really didn't want to be a doctor. I wanted to be a physicist. So I went to physics grad school and did mathematical physics, and I was, a practicing mathematical physicist for, 15 years or so, when at the Institute for Advanced Study, Nathan Myhrvold, who founded Microsoft Research, tried to convince me to go there and start a theory group there, which would bring together math, physics, and theoretical computer science. And I knew nothing about theoretical computer science. But I went because there was an opportunity to start an interdisciplinary lab, and that was irresistible to me. So, here I am 20 years later, having opened this lab about 10 years ago, and that's how I got here.
And what was your experience kind of being on the other side? So you've been in academia and now you're in industry. How does the world look like from that point of view?
Well, first of all, we have a very academic industrial lab. I've had probably 150 or 200 postdocs over the years, and I would say that 90 to 95% of them have landed up as professors. So that tells you that we are an academic enterprise. But one of the things that I find really exciting is that I hear about problems in a very early stage when, it's difficult to formulate them mathematically. And I love translating and connecting the pieces. So I will hear about a problem in the context of technology, and I will see that there's some way to view it through the lens of mathematics or the lens of physics, and then bring in the academic community to start looking at the problem. So for me, this is very exciting.
So it must also be exciting to be kind of so close to kind of a force that shapes kind of technology and actually our world. If you look at it from your own personal perspective, that's perhaps one of the big stories of our lives, that we went through this enormous transition in technology, particularly information technology. How do you relate to that yourself?
Well, I love being so close to it, and I think it's actually just begun. I think that machine learning and artificial intelligence are going to transform our individual lives because we will start to interact. Right now we have our phones, we have Siri and Cortana and the, different personal assistants, but I think it's going to become so much deeper than that. We will have beings that really understand us, that relate to us, and we will have companions for older people, which is going to become a big problem in the world. We will have companions for our children, and then machine learning will also transform healthcare. It will transform environmental science, which is incredibly important. And it will also, I believe, transform the more basic sciences. I believe that cosmology, for example, will get transformed by machine learning because of the data that we're bringing in and, even how we collect this data. Radio astronomers work very hard to collect data sparse data so that they don't have to Fourier transform it. I was just sitting in a board meeting and I asked, well, has anyone tried to use some of the new machine learning techniques so that we could actually measure and Fourier transform and see if we can get enough signal from that? So I think, in all aspects of this, as we develop machine learning, we are going to be able to really push ahead in the basic sciences, the applied sciences, and the way in which we interact with the world.
Is this already impacting your life right now? I mean, if you just look at your own personal life, perhaps, you feel that your technology is changing that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, technology is, we all have our phones. We get very attached to our phones. In fact, you see withdrawal. If people my husband just lost his phone last week, and he was
desperate.
He was desperate. Your phone connects you in so many different ways. It also connects me socially. I am actually a user of Facebook and Twitter. It took me a long time to adjust because I was not born into them like some younger people were. For me, it's not my native tongue. It's an acquired language. For the kids who are growing up today, it's their native tongue. But I have connected with so many people, people from my past, scientists. So I hear about different kinds of science, from scientists who are on Facebook and talking about new discoveries. So it connects us all in a really exciting way. And for me, especially because I love interdisciplinary work, it allows me to tap into these different kinds of science to think about how they might be ripe for the kinds of approaches. So for me, it's really, I could not imagine living without information technology.
If you think about particularly this kind of knowledge element, the fact that knowledge is now so easily, you can easily connect to it. It's so easy to collaborate. It's easy for knowledge to spread. You think that changes just the way our research and perhaps even our collective kind of brain works?
I personally do think it changes everything. I mean, I am someone who in my career I started out in math and physics, and I ventured into computer science and then ventured into economics and some social sciences and ventured into computational biology. There's no way that I could have done this without the world of knowledge, the universe of knowledge at my fingertips to learn about different things, to connect with different people. And also, I sometimes get my best ideas when I am hearing about different disciplines and I get an intuition that I might be able to connect them to the lenses through which I see the world, through mathematics and physics and phase transitions in particular. And so for me, this knowledge, we are really accelerating with information technology, the building of this fabric of knowledge, and we're breaking down the silos which existed.
I mean, if you push that a little bit further, there are clearly silos within, academia and research that are being broken. But if you think a little bit broader in terms of the world, so to which extent are we able to kind of reach everyone? And that kind of connectivity, is that something that's helping, so to say, also to spread knowledge truly across the globe?
Well, I think one of the really exciting things is that, with online courses and with, articles available on the archives and this kind of thing, you can be a scientist anywhere, even in the developing world where you don't have very much, but you have enough connectivity for a cell phone, and you can tap into this. So I think it has allowed us as scientists to help spur the scientific endeavor in the developing world. I don't know how we would have done it otherwise. You can't build up libraries in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, obviously, if you're starving, you're not going to be doing science. But if you were not starving, you might still have been isolated from this kind of worldwide scientific endeavor, and now you're not.
So it's just such a powerful force, and you're very close to the center of these big drivers. Do you see it almost by definition as a force for good, or are there also aspects that you worry about?
So I see a lot of wonderful aspects of it. I see that people are able to learn so much. I see that we also are able to spread technologies that help in really important ways in terms of clean water and things like that. So as we train people in the various countries, they can do this. But I also think, especially recently, we've seen this spread of fake news, and so I think this was a great shock. I think everyone expected the internet and the World Wide Web to be the great equalizer and to spread information. And we realized that, of course, it can also spread misinformation. So one of the areas that's being developed now, I have a group in one of my 2 labs that calls itself the FATE group: Fairness, Accountability, Transparency, and Ethics. And it brings together people from ethics, philosophy, law, with machine learning and information retrieval to look at whether there are ways in which we can use these technologies to guard against, the dark side of the web.
Well, if you think about other technologies, in fact, industrial development by itself, of course, caused lots of issues that often then technology is again is basically our only resource to deal with these kind of adverse effects. So you think for information technology it will be something similar? In the end, it's the next iteration of technology that will help to...
I think that a lot of people in machine learning and AI are now devoting efforts to trying to stop this spread of misinformation and also of bias. We have the problem with machine learning and artificial intelligence is that you have the algorithm, but you also have the data.
Yes.
And the algorithm takes in the data and outputs something. And the data is created by human beings. And so if the human beings have bias, then the outcome has bias. If you are looking for an engineer, the web is more likely to return a male name than a female name. And this is because it has learned from all the interaction. So I have some people in one of my labs who said, how can we use technology to solve this problem?
To rebalance, so to say.
To rebalance. So there's something called word vectors, which are used to generalize and broaden searches by all search engines. And those word vectors have implicit biases in them. They associate things in a gender biased way, in a racially biased way, in an economically biased way. And so some of my researchers took this, the gender bias, and they debiased the word vectors so that you could feed that into the search engine and get outputs which were not gender biased anymore. And so this is using machine learning, using algorithms, using mathematics to deal with some of the problems that are caused by the technology.
Do you worry sometimes that technology, becomes so kind of integrated in our lives that we aren't even aware of its what it's doing for us or not doing. For instance, you just said young children, they don't know a world without the internet.
But I'm not worried about it. I believe that they pick it up just like any other language. It's almost as if when language didn't exist in that, well, language started to exist slowly. But if I have one set of children who are raised with one language and another set who are raised with 3 languages, in fact, they might start talking a little later, but they are going to see the world in a deeper way. And I believe that children and even we who learn this not as our native tongue use it to connect things and to do things that were not possible in the past. I think it's actually part of our evolution that we now are beginning to adjust to the ways in which technology can enhance our lives.
So you talked about how knowledge and information spreads much more easily. On the other hand, knowledge always was power. And in some sense, Microsoft, you can say, is certainly one of these centers of power. So can you say something about how do we deal with this paradox? That on the one hand, information is spreading, but on the other hand, some of the most powerful companies use that kind of knowledge.
So I think that this is a real problem that these networks, and I study networks. Yes. I study them mathematically. I study their applications in social networks and biology and in economics. Networks actually centralize power for the network providers. Networks are incredibly powerful. People go on them and interact, and the network providers have incredible power. Jaron Lanier is a wonderful, wonderful author and technologist, and he wrote a book, I believe it was Who Owns the Future? And it was precisely this question. These networks, while generating so much value for the world, then take that value and centralize it among a few individuals or a few companies. Yes. And so he had a view that some would call a utopian view, attempting to redistribute that value to the people who participated in the network and created the value. And I'm not sure that he has come up with the right way to do that yet, but I think it's something that society needs to consider. Social good has been created, but then its value has been centralized. Nice. And how do we bring it back? What economic systems and social systems can we engineer to take some of the value back to those who helped create it by participating in the network?
What I find fascinating, which of course you never really have in academic setting, but if you talk to R&D being done at these large companies, that some of it is secret, right? It's knowledge that is held very closely, and you're also in competition with others. So how does that feel?
Well, I think first of all,
how much is there that
there
we don't know?
is proprietary information, kind of business information. Most of the people in my labs publish everything openly. So, and I think that's a requirement. We have brought in a lot of people from academia for whom being able to share knowledge is incredibly important. That's how science is done. Now, so there is some proprietary business information, and that, of course, does feed this centralization of value. There is also personally identifiable information, PII, which includes both things like your search history, which can reveal so much about you, it's unbelievable, and also, for example, your health information. There is nothing more personally identifiable than your genome. Yes. And your clinical health records are incredibly personal. So there's a big question about how do we extract value for individuals and for society from this data without compromising people's privacy and people's integrity. And I think this is one of the great challenges of the age of big data. There are, again, some technological, mathematical solutions. There's homomorphic encryption, which is a mathematical construct which allows you to extract information from the data, but return something which doesn't reveal that information. However, it slows the typical calculation down by about 10 to the 13th. Okay, so
that's not what you want to do.
That's not, but there are certain kinds of calculations which it only slows down by 10 to the 6th, which might still sound like a lot to you, but what if I said, you've done 23andMe or some other service which, looks at parts of your genome and tells you your odds of developing diabetes or Alzheimer's. You probably don't want that information to be public, but you might want that information used in some ways. If I slow down those calculations by 10 to the 6th, I can do 10,000 of them in 1 minute. Would you be willing to wait a minute to know this information about yourself in a completely private way? Yeah. And you probably would. So that is
the price you want to pay for.
That's a price you want to pay. So the question is, what's the price we're willing to pay in time, in calculation, for privacy? And I think that is something that, and then there's other forms of this. There's secure multi-party computation and other things. So we are going to have to, as a society, or as different societies with different ethical norms and different social norms, decide what are the trade-offs we're willing to make. I don't think we can run away and say we don't want any of this technology, because I think we're harming ourselves more than the technology should harm us or could harm us. So, how do different societies strike that balance? And this is a conversation that I believe society should be having, and then eventually, their legislatures can legislate about it. But we have to talk it out on a philosophical, first on a technological level, what is it possible to do? And then on a philosophical and ethical level. And the best thing would be to have the philosophical and ethical conversations combined with the scientific conversations about what's possible.
You mentioned already a few times, this kind of advent of artificial intelligence, machine learning, machines getting smarter and smarter. Just take that thought and push it a little bit further. So how will our lives be impacted by that? So first think about it, say the next 5 years, but then also take a longer view.
So I think there are certain things that are going to be really, really improved by this technology. I recall, talking to my husband and saying, I might want to, get a house here or there. And he says, well, we have to be careful because, if you want to have this house for 30 years, maybe you'll be too old to want to drive to the store to get your eggs. And I said, you don't have to worry about that. We won't be driving ourselves. Yes. In 10 years, none of us will drive ourselves. Our cars will drive us. So we don't have to worry about that. So there are, things on a shorter time scale. Also, I really think a lot about elder care. My parents are getting older. I think there will be robots that can actually help us, help our parents, which will impact me because I care deeply about them and I want them to have a life in which they're more independent, which this technology will allow us to do. I think in the long run, the things that I get really excited about on, out 10 to 20 years is the effect on personalized medicine. It's going to be unbelievable. I mean, we have so many layers of information to bring together. We have the genome, but we also have, devices that sit on our wrists that very soon these devices will be good enough to measure your blood sugar just through your skin, from whether your hemoglobin is oxygenated or not. They'll be able to tell how much glucose you have. They can tell your gait and whether, as a person ages, whether there's something wrong with the way in which they're walking. And then you start to combine that with clinical information, with diagnostic tests of various sorts. Each of us has thousands of codes, of diagnostic codes associated with us over our lives. If we could put that information together with continuously collected information and genomic information and information that a doctor records in his or her notes, which we'll be able to access via natural language processing, we will be able to increase the quality of life tremendously. I mean, we'll be able to prolong it, but for me, I think the most important thing is increasing the quality of life. So that really excites me on an intermediate time scale.
Are you worried that in the end, the kind of decisions and the place where all this information will come together will not be in the human mind, right? It will be might be in a machine, or it might be some combination. So
I am not someone who is worried about the singularity, which is who's worried about the machines taking over. I know a lot of very good technologists are worried about this, so yes. It's not. I mean, it's not something that can just be dismissed. But I believe. Are
you not worried about, in the sense it's fine with you, or you're worried in the sense you don't see it happening?
I see that there will be an integration of human knowledge and the human mind with these, what I view as enhancements of the human mind. I am not particularly worried that these will turn on us and take over, because I think that they are really extensions of us. You might have worried, I don't know, in the time of the first printing presses, that if the masses get this knowledge from books, well, first it was just the wealthy people who got the knowledge, and then over time, the masses, that there would be a restructuring of society. And indeed there was a restructuring of society, but that was because there was so much more value that we could actually improve the lot of more of society. And my hope is that as we integrate humans with computers and with technology as enhancements of ourselves, that again, there will be a lot of value. We still have half the population on this earth, which does not live as well as the developed world. And so we could really use value creation in this world to improve the lot of those people.
If you take the long view and you think of the billions of years of evolution of life, and even the hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution, and now we're in this phase where technology is, in some sense, happening. You see this as some kind of a continuation of what nature is doing, but then at a different level and a different speed?
I do see this as a continuation of what nature is doing. And in fact, if you look at all of human evolution so far, we started out as hunters and gatherers. And then we began to farm. And what did we do? Well, we harnessed other organisms for our own good, and we interfered with their genomes, not by going in there on a cellular level and interfering, or on a molecular level, but we bred certain plants and animals. And so I see this as a natural evolution. I see it as a way in which we are harnessing other kinds of power. And I honestly expect that there are probably others in this universe who have already done this.
So you say we're kind of domesticating technology.
We're domesticating technology. We are domesticating technology. It's our creation, but it is also something that we domesticate. And we have created species, honestly.
Yes.
And I think provided that science as it develops and technology as it develops is done in concert with ethics, then we will be fine. Okay, so I think it's very, very important that we have ethicists, philosophers, legal scholars, sociologists, anthropologists participating in the creation of this science and technology.
Is that a big if? I mean, the sense that, we can kind of survive technology. If you honestly look at previous episodes, not that long ago, like nuclear arms, etc., there were some close calls.
Very close calls.
So it's not an obvious fact that humans are smart enough to control and deal in a responsible way with technology.
It's definitely not an obvious fact. And I don't know how much I would wager that we will be here 10,000 years from now. We could destroy ourselves with nuclear weapons. I think we are laying the foundation to destroy ourselves with climate change. Yes. So I am hoping that we will wake up to some of this and we will be able to use technology to help correct some of the things that we have already done and help us to survive what we cannot correct.
Jennifer, we were talking about the kind of specific time in human evolution that we are right now, where kind of we're starting this kind of symbiotic relationship with technology. And you're about to tell us this is something that reminds you of a phase transition. What's a phase transition?
So a phase transition is something that everybody experiences. When water freezes, it's going from liquid to solid. When water boils, it's going from liquid to gas. These are qualitative changes. We have quantitative changes as, water goes from 97 to 98 to 99 degrees. It hits 100 degrees Celsius, and there's a qualitative change of state. And so phase transitions are those qualitative changes that occur at specific values of a parameter. And yet for me, I study phase transitions mathematically, but they're also one of the lenses through which I view the world. Sometimes these lenses can be made incredibly mathematically precise, and other times they're only a metaphor. And in this case, I see points in human behavior, in human evolution, as phase transition points. I see the shift from hunter-gatherer to domestication as a qualitative shift in what a Homo sapien could do.
Yes.
And I do believe that we are very near another one of those cusps where we are going to be able to integrate the technology and the knowledge with our own minds and with our own bodies. And we're going to be able to do things we were never able to do before, or that we were never able to do for the vast majority of people before. And I think that, if we're still around 10,000 years from now and somebody looks at the different ages, where we domesticated animals or the Industrial Revolution, I think that this, roughly around this time, people will identify another change, another phase transition in which we interact with the world and with each other in a different way.
One of the, pushing that metaphor a little bit, one of the effects in phase transition, that certainly you get kind of connections, correlations over very different kind of scales. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about this kind of connectivity. Would that be one of the kind of hallmarks of this kind of new phase of humankind, where it's no longer us as individuals, but it's us together and with machines? Do you see a role of that?
I see a definite role. So what I love about phase transitions is that local interactions create a global effect.
Yes.
Local interactions between the water molecules lead to a change from liquid to gas as the water boils. And so I believe that we are, and typically you see the onset or the disappearance of long-range order. Mm-hmm. When we learned to write things down, we could do much more than before we were able to write things down, right? We couldn't have...
We could pass information to other
We
generations.
could pass information to other generations. We could have an economic system between us in which we didn't just barter, but, I gave you grain today and you gave me some animal tomorrow because we could write it down.
Yes.
And our minds have the capacity to only deal with a certain number of people. They say it's about 150 or so. Deal with a certain amount of information. Some of us can remember more than others, mm-hmm. but there's a limit. And so writing things down qualitatively changed the size of the domains in which humans could interact. And I believe that we are at another transition now where we are going really to a global scale of interaction. And we've talked about global scales for years with planes and economy and, the stock market of one country connected to that mm-hmm. of another. But I think this is going to be the deep manifestation of it, that our knowledge base is becoming universal, is becoming long range. So we're seeing the onset of long range order in our knowledge.
If you think about this as a force, is it kind of unstoppable? Is it somehow an autonomous development?
I think it is definitely unstoppable. Mm-hmm. Actually, there are systems where there's kind of a driving force mm-hmm. that then leads to a critical transition. There's something in mathematics and physics that I worked on many years ago called self-organized criticality. So that was driving you towards a certain kind of phase transition. But the driving force there was just, the deposit of certain particles. Mm-hmm. Here, there is a driving force, I believe, in human beings to connect with each other. Mm-hmm. And that force is leading us towards this transition. I don't think it's stoppable in any way. No one, you know this, no one is going to stop you from trying to learn more about particle physics, or for me, trying to learn more. It's not going to happen. And on so many different levels, on emotional levels, on intellectual levels, on levels of survival, we are driven to connect. Mm. And I think, but these are local interactions.
Yes.
And I think that what's happening is that technology has facilitated the onset of long-range order here.
So the title of this series is The Mind of the Universe. And the idea is really that in some sense this connectivity is creating a mind that's at least a global mind or something. You see that kind of happening, that our individual being becomes much more part of a global ensemble?
I very much believe this is happening, and I find it so exciting. Yes, I believe that we are part of this global ensemble. I see, I start to work, I come up with a, theory of phase transitions for deep learning, and before I know it, there are people in other parts of the world that I thought were disconnected. I thought their research was on something different, and they find the paper on the archives, and they hear a talk, and all of a sudden we're connected, and it happens so much more rapidly over, obviously, world scale geographical distances, but also intellectual distances are shrinking. We are able to connect across what previously were intellectual divides. So it's world scale, but also it's our knowledge is becoming integrated at an incredible rate.
Can you speak also, this knowledge in terms of different fields, subjects, but I guess there's also something like the culture from which you approach this, culture that has been developed in various countries. Now it could be gender-based, or various ways to look at the world. Talk about what this kind of diversity means once we start connecting these various points of view, because not everybody has the same point of view.
I actually love the fact that not everybody has the same point of view. In my career, what I've done is I have brought together different disciplines, because I believe that the most exciting things happen at the boundaries of disciplines. You bring the insights and the lens and the specific techniques of one discipline to bear on another, and it just it accelerates the understanding of a different subject so much. I believe also we should have different cultural backgrounds. Now, in fact, in the different fields, we really do have different cultural backgrounds. A physicist views the world very differently from an anthropologist, and I see these different views coming together over time. But I also have people from many different countries in my lab. They have different social norms. I love this, because then we step back and we consider the differences in social norms. In information technology, there are so many questions around privacy. The social norms in Germany and the Netherlands are so different than in the U.S. We always in the U.S. err on the side of free speech, and I hope we continue to do so. And in Germany, they err on the side of privacy. And so when we bring Germans and Americans together, we have to deal with these differences, and we have to stand back and try to understand how those norms formed, why they formed, and what are the benefits of each, and under what circumstances we retain which norms, which is, almost a kind of international law, right?
Yes.
And then finally, I think gender balance is incredibly important. In my labs, we happen to have a lot of women. Some people say to me, how do you get so many women? And I say, well, I guess we just scare the men away. Or certain men. We scare the ones who are uncomfortable with gender, with gender diversity away. And I think also women, when they see a woman leader, they say, okay, there's a place for me here. But I think that these are sweeping generalizations, but I think that women sometimes tend to be more into collaboration, sometimes tend to be more into taking their mathematics, for example, or their computer science and applying it to the real world. And as I say, it's sweeping generalizations, because there are many men who really care about the social implications of their work. But I think it just as you want to bring different cultures from different countries and from different disciplines together. I think you want to bring different genders together and different racial and religious backgrounds together, because it just causes you to step back and see the world more broadly, which is, I think, the way to really push science forward.
So you would argue that it really just benefits research and development by itself, to have this greater diversity?
Absolutely, I feel that way. I think that if you're always with the people who come from the same background, if you just have physicists, they ask the kinds of questions that physicists ask,
right,
which are wonderful. I mean, I was, raised a physicist, but I love the fact that I talk to a biologist and I begin, and it takes years actually to appreciate. People think you have to learn the techniques of a different field, but I think you really have to learn the values of a different field. Mm-hmm. And what are the kinds of questions they ask? What are the things they care about in a different field before you can have deep and incredibly impactful collaborations? And in the same way, having gender balance, having, nationally cultural balance allows you to broaden your view, and which ultimately allows you to go into something more deeply.
If you just look at your own personal life story and your professional development, you seem to be very adventurous, going into new cultures or something.
Yeah.
How did that feel? I mean, was that something you had from the very beginning?
It's really funny because
How were you as a child?
Right, I thought I would be scared of things. Mm-hmm. I actually am scared of things sometimes. But there's this other, somebody once told me I was counterphobic. Anything that scares me, I rush towards. Mm-hmm. So sometimes my initial reaction is a little bit of fear. I don't understand that at all, mm-hmm. And then I think, but then if I don't understand it, it has power over me. So I'm just going to rush in and I'm going to try to understand it and try to absorb it, because then I can absorb that power, that way of looking at the world. So I land up, and I just get excited about it.
Why
too.
Are you so attracted to things you don't know?
I think, you see, each time I also, as I get older, come with things that I do know now. Mm-hmm. So now when you're first a graduate student, you actually come with very little. And so it's really hard because you're coming to these very difficult questions and you have very few bows and,
mm-hmm.
you have very few ways. I mean, you have your own mind and your own creativity, and that's wonderful. But you have very little perspective. Yes. And now, as I move into different fields, there's the initial fear and there's the activation barrier of having to learn not only the techniques, but also the values and the questions of that field. But then I bring my probability theory distribution perspective to it, or I bring my phase transition perspective. So I bring all these different perspectives.
I have all these different arrows now.
I have all these different arrows.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I'm so much of a better graduate student than I was the first time around, and hopefully I still retain some of my creativity. I think it also really allows me to retain creativity, because I think when you enter a new field, you have to create something yourself to understand that field. And when you stay in a field, sometimes you just hone the details of what you know, which can lead to remarkable breakthroughs. But this excitement of, now I understand something I didn't understand before. This rush you get mixed with the fear that you get as a graduate student, I guess must be addictive to me, because I keep doing it again and again.
Do you kind of imagine the future? Do you imagine somehow what's out there in the areas that you don't know?
do I imagine the future? Well, my one great sadness is that I won't be able to, I won't be here to see all of this unless I'm wrong in my religious views. But
or you solve these pesky problems in biology.
These pesky problems in biology, although God forbid then for all the people who are on the earth.
Yes.
But I do imagine the barriers in science, in the different sciences, being broken down. Much as we've seen it in economics. We have one economic system throughout much of the world. And I believe that we are going to move towards a time when science is more unified. Mm-hmm. So for me, this is really, really exciting that we can kind of re-enter a renaissance. The Renaissance had all the sciences together, and then we specialized and we went apart. And now I believe this new knowledge base, which we all share, and this new ability to communicate will bring us back, to a postmodern renaissance where the sciences are more united.
How will life be in this new Renaissance era?
Well, I'm not sure how. I hope that some of the inconveniences of life will be removed, mm-hmm. having to drive myself somewhere when I'm tired, or we're now stuck in between epochs where we have to sit on the phone and press buttons, press 1, press 2. Hopefully that will be removed. So all these pesky little things that interfere. On the other hand, I hope that we will not remove our ability to walk by the Charles River and and see the boats and see the birds and feel connected to the universe in other ways. So I hope that we can retain the physicality, which brings us great joy and peace, and which I think is necessary for creativity of all kinds. And yet we can remove some of the less enjoyable aspects of physicality.
What about, you say there's this incredible force that drives technology, and but another element in that is just the joy of finding things out.
Yes.
There is just this playfulness to it.
Yes.
Because technology and science and research are serious business, but do you consider yourself a serious person?
I always play with
mm-hmm.
science. I always play. It's interesting. When I was a member at the IAS for the first time, Enrico Bombieri asked me how it was going, and I'd been there for about a month, and I said, well, I'm not having ideas. And he said, are you worried that your ideas aren't great enough? Because this happens to people when they spend a year at the Institute for the first time. And I said, yeah, maybe I am. Maybe I should just go back to playing mm-hmm. with mathematics, to just, I don't know where I'm going. I'm just wandering around. And I just started doing that again. I started playing. I started saying, it doesn't matter. I don't have to have a great idea today. I'm just playing. And it was actually during that year that I made the connection between statistical physics and theoretical computer science. I played, I talked to people, I found all these connections. So I think wandering and playing are really necessary for scientists.
They're serious business.
They are serious business.
Is it something you encourage in others?
I very much encourage wandering in others. I have many postdocs in my labs at a given time, 10 or 15 of them. And I very much encourage them to talk across disciplines, to step back, to play. Because that forms their worldviews for later, mm-hmm. And the more they play, the broader their worldview. So I very, very much encourage this. I sometimes tell people you're writing too many papers. You're not you should relax. This is a time to really figure out what kind of a scientist you're going to be.
If you think back, we started our conversation with you as a young girl, having certain dreams. Looking back, everything you have experienced, you have seen happening in your own life and in society, are you surprised by that?
I'm completely surprised. I'm very driven in a way. I'm playful and driven. And so I'm always driven towards something. I always have some. Right now, I really want to understand cancer immunotherapy because I'm starting a project with Arnie Levine at the IAS. I'm always driven. And so I am rushing towards some goal. But then I take a turn and I start going towards another goal, and so all these turns have taken me on a path I never would have imagined. And I also try to encourage the young scientists I mentor and I work with to just not to always have great goals, because I think it's important, but to always be open to the opportunities, to grab that brass ring that might just appear, because you never know where that's going to take you. And it's not as if you're not bringing all of it along with you. You're bringing all that you've done.
Are you feeling a part of something which is much bigger than yourself in that?
Absolutely. I'm very much feeling a part of it. As I said to you earlier, I believe that the world, that barriers are being broken down in science. And I'd like it to extend even further. I'd like it to extend to ethics and, law and these other areas. And so I get very excited every day when I see some other little barrier falling. Robert Frost said, something there is that doesn't love a wall. And I do not like walls. I do not like walls. And so I see them break down on small scales, and then all of a sudden there's a phase transition because there is not a wall. And so then a lot of people are passing between two disciplines. At first, only the ones who are willing to climb over the part of the wall that remains do that.
Yeah.
But then it gets broken down enough that you see unifications of different parts of science.
I know it's difficult on a day-to-day basis, but are you an optimist?
Oh, I'm very much an optimist. Yes, on day-to-day, oh my God, I'll never be able to prove this, but on medium to long-range scales, I'm very much an optimist, which is also why I love mentoring young people, because I'm optimistic about their futures as well. And I feel that's a way in which, I can have a piece of this science that goes on.
Because if you think about it, one of the great things is that when people start writing things down, they were passing things to the next generation. And, the knowledge that we enjoying right now is from many, many generations before us. And you feel you're also passing this along to the future?
I feel I'm very much passing it along. The grad students with whom I work and the postdocs are, perhaps what I am proudest of. I'm proud of particular pieces of my own work, but, I probably have well over 100 of my ex-students and postdocs sitting at top universities around the world. And I see in elements of what they do, they're approaching things in a slightly different way because of the environment I help to create for them and the worldview I help to give them a little piece of. So, that's definitely my greatest legacy.
You talked about how we are forming this kind of great network, this kind of global intelligence. That's in space. But you also see this kind of extending in time, is that it?
Absolutely, extending in time. And, I won't be, leading labs 100 years from now, certainly. But they and their disciples will. They are just, and they are going to do things that I cannot imagine, which is very exciting to me.
Undoubtedly, you try. So, okay, Jeff, I want to go into some of the more specific technologies that are driving these tremendous changes. The first thing I want to talk about is virtual reality. You told us about we're going to live in this kind of new world. Probably a lot of what we'll experience in that new world will not be direct experiences as we do right now, but will be in a virtual form. So what do you see happening there?
So I think that virtual reality and actually augmented reality, which is the projection of some virtual elements into your physical space, are just going to be wonderful. I mean, I think it will have all kinds of applications, from obviously games and amusement to many people being able to travel to other countries to which they haven't been able to travel.
While sitting in their chairs. To travel in the universe, fly through the universe and see various stars, to very concrete things like a doctor in the United States being able to guide operations in the developing world. So it will have very practical applications, and it will also be magical in so many ways. And I feel like I get to travel all the time for my work, but I feel bad for people who can't travel. So many of them will have a lot of these experiences, and in augmented reality and virtual reality, these are essentially visceral experiences. Perhaps in some sense our reality is already augmented, right? Because our brain is processing what we see, is adding stuff to it.
Absolutely. I definitely think that my reality is augmented because I project
what you know, and
I project what I know. I project my views. I see networks. I see phase transitions. And so I have kind of these parallel views going on.
Is there a risk that we will kind of detach from the world and detach from each other?
I don't think we will detach from each other. I think there is that it is really inbred in us to want to connect with each other. The World Wide Web started at first. There was just information on the World Wide Web. Well, what became the most popular things on the World Wide Web? It was social media. It was connecting. It was Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. It was not just passively interacting with some knowledge or some entertainment. It was interaction. So I believe that we will always want to interact.
It's just kind of a social animal, and this will be just enhancing that.
Yes, and it would take many, many, many millions of years for us to evolve into something other than a social animal. So I believe that we will continue to remain fundamentally social.
One of the things that is driving all this, we also talked about artificial intelligence and machine learning and virtual reality, is the sheer computing power that is now available. I know often this is kind of a semi-secret how incredibly strong these resources are, particularly in the private industry. But what do you see happening in computing? In particular, we are now in a phase where quantum computing is getting closer. I know Microsoft is heavily betting on that. So what will that do to us?
Well, for many years now, people have been worried about the end of Moore's law, the doubling every year and a half. And so we are going to need new computing paradigms. I think quantum computing will be one. There are different kinds of quantum computers. Mike Friedman at Microsoft, who's a wonderful topologist, is looking at topological quantum computing. There are other kinds of quantum computing. One could consider adiabatic quantum computing, which would have different realizations. I'm just starting to work with some people in Holland on this, actually, on adiabatic quantum computing, possibly to create hardware that learns. So, we need people thinking about what are the next generations.
But try to kind of get us a feeling of the magnitude of these changes. Now, what will be possible, what's not possible right now, just in terms of sheer power, computational power?
Well, I think that we are going to be able to conjure up. One of the things that is really computation intensive is image and graphics, okay? And we spoke about virtual reality. Well, virtual reality will not be possible without a great deal more computing power.
Wow.
So we really need many generations more of computing power for you to be able to be in this room and yet walk among the pyramids, to interact with each other. There will be things that, where a hologram of someone else is in the room with you, a little bit like Star Trek. I very much hope, I think everybody who travels very much hopes that virtual meetings will get much better, so that we don't have to keep hopping on planes and wasting our time and destroying the environment. So all of these things are going to be facilitated. And then also, precision medicine. We want to integrate so much. Your genome, right now, we are only looking at certain parts of the genome. We're going to be able to look at so much more, and we're going to be able to take in the genomes of so many more individuals. Right now, in many diseases, we don't yet have enough signal to be able to say anything.
So you say we just kind of miss the computational power.
We miss the computational power.
These kind of issues right on. And,
absolutely. Absolutely. There are so many diseases where we don't have enough samples, we don't have enough computational power on those samples to be able to get a good signal. And as we do that, we are going to be able to really allow people to live very productive lives with mental illness, with many other conditions, which we really can't touch now. We're in a very primitive place. Our treatment of cancer is incredibly primitive. We, poison the whole body most of the time in order to try to cure someone of cancer. So really, we're in the dark ages medically, and in order to realize the promise, we're going to need many more generations of computing power.
Let's go back also to the theme of kind of technological progress and inequality or equality. So clearly in the beginning phase, this is benefiting a small group, but you're indicating in the end you see this as kind of spreading. So what will these kind of technological revolutions do to the poorer half of the world? And also perhaps in many countries there are places that are, so to say, very close by, but they are very far away in terms of the spreading of ideas and technology. So what do you see changing there?
So I think there are very many people in technology, both people who have made their fortunes in technology and people who are currently doing technology, creating technology, who care deeply about inequality. I think we need to get connectivity to all parts of the world, and we need to get inexpensive devices to all parts of the world. I think we need energy sources that will enable us to power those devices without destroying our climate. So we need renewable energy sources, and We need nanotechnology and other areas that will really allow us to do that. We will be able to transmit knowledge so that to help people, create clean sources of water, to help in agriculture. And we can be applying machine learning to agricultural data and really improving the food sources for a lot of people in the developing world. We can ultimately, once we have gotten the medical and nutritional requirements dealt with, we can start to teach people in other parts of the world. And hopefully virtual meetings will be much better. Right now we do have online classes, but I hope there will be a time when someone from sub-Saharan Africa can really, his or her hologram can be in the classroom with someone at Cambridge University or at Princeton University, and we can really begin to deal with the fact that if people are not together, it's hard to give them equal access.
Do you feel we have the right incentives, both in the academic world, in government, but also in the private industry, to do these kind of right things for human development?
So honestly, I feel that some of the incentives are wrong. Okay, and I think that's one of the big questions in society is, how do we create incentives for social good, or for what a game theorist would call social welfare? Yes. And I think right now we have swung a little too far in the United States, this is my own private view, towards centralization of power, centralization of finances, wealth creation, and we're hearing about it all the time, and I think we're experiencing a lot of instability globally because of this. So my hope is that the pendulum that seems to be swinging one way will swing back the other way towards a little more regulation, which would allow us to share the wealth more. But for this, I believe it's also really important that we have social scientists interacting with scientists and technologists on a fundamental level and figuring out. Jaron Lanier had suggested that maybe any knowledge creation through following people in their movements on the web, instead of all of the wealth of that going to a centralized power, some fraction of it should trickle back to the people who helped to create the data that powers these great advances. So, I'm not sure whether that's the answer, but I believe that we will have technologists and economists and anthropologists and ethicists looking at these questions when the world becomes sufficiently unhappy with how far the pendulum has swung.
So in some sense, fundamentally, you feel that we kind of control our destiny in that respect by doing the right things.
I think that we, that human beings learn, and I don't think anybody is comfortable with the instability now. Yes. And so in learning to decrease the variance, to decrease the instability, we're going to swing a little bit back towards equality. And then, we'll probably swing back again because we're a dynamical system. Yeah.
I will come back to that. Don't dare to say the word phase transition because then all the technology will collapse. But let's briefly go back to your own kind of earlier life, where you were much more focused on your original, I would say, kind of academic love in mathematical physics. So can you just tell us a little bit, how did you start out in science, and what did you exactly study, and what did you do?
So in my early career, I studied phase transitions in what are called disordered systems with some noise in them. There were realizations of this in laboratories, and some nice materials have special properties because of the noise. What was interesting is that although this was certainly not the reason that I went to Microsoft, I went to found interdisciplinary groups because they were willing to support me in that. But when the internet started to take off and the World Wide Web started to take off, I saw many of the same structures in these self-organized but very noisy networks. And so it really, there was the mathematical models I could take, and I could look at these huge networks that we were creating. So it was very much it was this lens through which I viewed phase transitions. I mean, I found inequalities on critical exponents and various esoteric things in these systems I studied. But then I could go over to these other systems and see the same structures. I think as scientists, when we're young, we learn, we put on certain lenses, and no matter how we try, those are always the first eyes with which we view any new problem. And what got me so excited about technology is that occasionally there were very good eyes through which to view.
You could see things that others couldn't see. Probably.
That others couldn't see. Yes.
That's terrific. Perhaps, just wrapping up a little bit, I want just to kind of circle back to kind of the big picture. And, with all the lovely things we have seen happening in terms of technology, and just come back to looking to the future. So if you kind of close your eyes and you envision this world of tomorrow, tell us just what comes up, what bubbles up. What do you see in this dream?
So one of the things for me that would be very exciting, I have collaborators all over the world, and I love to see them, and I think they like to see me. and it's just so frustrating because we have to carve time out of our schedules, and we have to get on planes and get jet lag, and I really believe that at some point in the not too distant future, I am going to be able to be sitting in a room with you, but you're not going to be here. Or I'm going to be able to be standing at a blackboard with you and writing, and we're both going to write, and we're going to see each other's stuff, and we can have somebody from yet another place interacting with us. So for me, as a scientist, when I get an idea, being able to connect with anyone in the world at any time, essentially, is something that I'm really looking forward to. And, for others who do their own thing, who are artists or who are musicians, can they, can you have a string quartet with 4 people in different countries? Wouldn't that be lovely? So where it's not a terribly degraded form of reality. So for me, this technology moves towards greater connection. For me, it's scientific connection. For others, it will be artistic, or, your family is in Holland. Wouldn't you love to be able to sit down and have a dinner with them when you're sitting in Princeton,
So you see this, if you then take the long view and you see, human beings they started probably living, with just a handful, very small, isolated groups, and we're growing. Now we have this incredibly complicated world, getting closer to each other, sometimes connecting more. So we'll have some transition to a phase where basically everybody is in contact with everybody as much as you want. You think that will happen?
I think it will be it will be sparse in the sense, okay, so a sparse graph is one in which you're not connected to a positive fraction of everybody else in the graph. I don't think I'm going to have 1 billion people with whom I'm interacting, but they can be anywhere. That distances are just going to shrink. So physical distances are going to shrink. Intellectual distances are going to shrink. And so we will have a much more unified, connected world. And I think, all of us strive, whether you're, a particle physicist actually striving for what you call grand unification, or, whether you're someone like me who wants to see certain aspects of physics and biology connected to each other. I think we all strive for that, and that the technology will allow us to do that. And we're seeing some of the intellectual connections before the physical connections, but virtual reality, I think, when it's done right, when you can really read someone else's emotions and you can you can relate to them, will allow us to also break down those, barriers of distance. Not sure about the rest of the universe. I mean, I truly believe there are other sentient beings in the universe. So also it would be very nice, I think, if we could connect with them without having to travel long distances.
You feel we first have to connect with ourselves in order to make that next step?
I do, actually. And, I don't know. We are probably limited by the speed of light. But I actually believe that within a distance that we can see, there are other sentient beings, that I can see in my lifetime. So,
do you see us pursuing that, exploring the universe?
I hope
in the
so.
end? Will we do it as physical beings, or will we do it through our technology?
I think we'll do it through our technology. I think we have inherent limitations as physical beings, and what this technology is going to do is free us from the physical limitations so that our almost unlimited drive to understand and to connect can truly be unleashed.
If you then look at the timeline of human beings, spending a few billion years on planet Earth, life as we know it, but then at some point will be spreading across the universe. Is that what you see happening?
I think we might, especially if we ruin the Earth, which is a distinct possibility. But I also believe that maybe we'll connect with other parts of the universe without actually physically going there. So, which might be easier. I mean, right now we're physically going just to the other side of the Earth. And, last month I went to Europe 3 times from the U.S. and it just, it's too much, right? Yeah. It's too much. And I certainly, wouldn't want to try to leave our solar system.
I must say it's a very attractive image. Often said, one of the big frustrations in life is that you can't unify with another person. But somehow you're sketching a future where science and technology will allow us to do so.
I believe so. And, in my own personal life, I have tried to do that. My husband and I work together.
Yes. And
we write papers together, we do research, we run labs together. So I do try to do this because I like to do many, many things. And I also like to be connected with people, which means for my husband, we must work together because we're going to spend too much time working. And, wouldn't it be nice if, not quite to that extent, but connection is possible, because I believe that scientifically, very, very often the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And so we need to break down both the intellectual barriers and the physical barriers. And the part that technology has not realized for us yet are the physical barriers. It's still, I know we can we can have a Skype call and it's wonderful relative to not having a Skype call, but we still fly to see each other if we really want to work together, you know, and I'm really hoping that we can feel the other person's presence and not be inhibited by this barrier and be able to work together and, you know, do science together.
I'm so happy I flew over here to have this conversation. Thank you very much.
Imagine
Having this all the time.
Yes,
That's
yes.
terrific.